Hi everyone, my name's Luke Fleming. I'm the artistic director and violist of the Manhattan Chamber Players. It's a great pleasure to be able to play music for you, albeit in a very different context again this year for the Grand Canyon Music Festival. My colleagues are here right now in Phoenix, and actually we've just recorded the two 30-minute concerts that you're going to hear from the Manhattan Chamber Players this week as part of the Grand Canyon Music Festival. Claire has asked me to say just a few words about the program, about the music that we're going to play and why we've picked the pieces we have picked. We decided this year to bring back the people who came last year with us, the Speltz brothers, Brooke and Brendan, who are a cellist and violinist, so a string trio between us Manhattan Chamber Players members with me on the viola. And Brooke and Brendan actually come from a very musical family. Their parents play the violin and the cello, and so we actually have a string quintet. It's the Speltz family plus me who are playing for you this year. And the pieces we are bringing you kind of are from the beginning and end of both the classical and the romantic periods. This year is, though we haven't had much of a chance, sadly, to celebrate, is Beethoven's the 250th anniversary of his birth. So on both programs, we have selections from Beethoven's String Trio in C minor, which is one of his early masterpieces. And Beethoven's early period kind of is the beginning of the end of the classical period as we move into the romantic period. And you'll hear in these selections from this string trio the fiery, passionate writing that perhaps you wouldn't think of in classical composers like Haydn and Mozart and are so prevalent in Beethoven. The beginning of the classical period you hear in our selection by Joseph Haydn, which Claire joins us for, a flute quartet written in the 1760s, which is really kind of right at the beginning of when classical period had been transitioned to from the Baroque period. Strong emphasis on consonance and balance and proportion, and just very a return to simplicity as opposed to the complexities of the Baroque period. And you'll definitely hear that in the Haydn, which is kind of some of the best party music ever written, that sort of thing. And then you're going to hear music from the beginning of the Romantic period. Schubert, at the end of his life, he died very young. He was only 31 years old when he died, but his very last piece, or one of them, was the string quintet, written for the somewhat, certainly at the time, odd combination of two violins, one viola, and two cellos. It's a huge work. All told, it's about 50 minutes long, and we played it last year at Grand Canyon Music Festival. For these concerts, we decided to play the second movement, which is just one of the most gorgeous creations in all the literature. It's very long on its own, about 12, 13 minutes long, but just it's like watching still water, ripples on a pond, and it's so perfect for the atmosphere of Grand Canyon Music Festival. So even though you're not seeing the canyon, this piece, it's just so serene and so ethereal. We think it's perfect for this. That's really at the beginning of the Romantic period, and then you fast forward to the 1890s, and you have this late Romantic drama that you're going to hear in the selection by Anton Arinsky. Arinsky is a composer that very often gets compared to Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky was his idol, so there's a lot of similarities in their writing. He also wrote for an incredibly odd combination in his string quartet. It's not a traditional string quartet of two violins, viola, and cello, but rather one violin, one viola, and two cellos, which is the instrumental combination of the Speltz family. And it's one of the only pieces in the standard repertoire that works for their combination. So that's our selection from the late Romantic. And finally, the oddball of the pieces that we throw into the mix is by a composer named Luigi Boccherini. He was a virtuoso cellist in the kind of early to mid-classical period, but he was always kind of a rebel, writing things that were in different forms than other people wrote, and putting movements in odd pairings and that sort of thing. But because of him being a virtuoso cellist, the emphasis is placed on the cello in the writing, which was also somewhat odd at the time. It's taken away from the first violin. And the piece we're playing is actually a movement from one of his string quintets, of which he wrote over 100. He's an incredibly prolific composer. It's a fandango movement. He was a Italian composer who eventually settled in Spain, so he chose the fandango as his inspiration for this movement. And it's really just two chords repeated over and over again with embellishments on top, but he really kind of makes more of a two-chord passage over the course of 8 minutes than I think any composer could, all within the context of this fandango. You can imagine castanets being played while this is all going on. It's a really fun movement that we'll play for you. And then another piece by Boccherini, which we do as one of the encores for this concert, could hold a claim to the most famous of all classical pieces. It's a minuet from one of his string quintets as well, and that doesn't sound like anything you would recognize, but when you hear it, I'm almost certain that you will recognize the piece. And finally, the encore on the other concert is just a short selection of an organ sonata by Mendelssohn. This is an arrangement I did for string quartet from the organ sonata, and it's just a really nice, lovely way to close out the concert after all the drama of the finale of the Arensky quartet with two cellos. So it's a hodgepodge of stuff over the course of two 30-minute concerts, but it gives you a really good sampler platter of the classical and romantic periods in chamber music, and we hope you enjoy it, and we hope to see you in person making music for you again soon. Thank you for listening.